Sorry, I just realised I was muted. Hello and welcome to this evening's event. My name is Gavin Merrifield and I will be your host for tonight. This event has been organised by the Manchester Science and Philosophy Group. We are the Manchester local group of a national UK organisation called Christians in Science. Our events are run from a Christian perspective, but anyone interested in the relationship between science, faith, and religion is very welcome here with us tonight. CiS aims to bring together and support Christians who are interested in the positive interactions between science, the church, and Christian faith. You can go to our website at www.cis.org.uk to find out more about us or to access our other resources. Be sure also to check our YouTube page where you will find recordings of all our recent events and conferences. If you would like to support our work in a practical way, then please consider whether you might like to become a friend or a member of CiS, or if you're very brave, think about affiliation for your church. Details for all these options, again, can be found on our website. To stay up to date on our future events here in Manchester, you can follow our Eventbrite page or be added to our mailing list on the email that you're seeing on your screen now. After tonight, we'll be taking a short break after Easter. And after that, I would encourage as many of you as possible to join us at our upcoming conference, which will be at St. John's College in Durham on the 7th of May, which will be in person, which will be a welcome return to in-person events for us, or you'll be able to join us online. That seemed to work pretty well for our last autumn conference, so we're doing that again this time through. The theme of the conference, as you see, is science, faith, and public engagement. And we'll be joined by a number of organisations who are active in that area of work here in the UK, who will tell us about their work with students, with churches, with youth, and with schools. And it's an opportunity for us to get together, find out a bit more about each other, and to share some best practices as well, and to think about how we might take those back to our home churches and organisations as well. So that's on the 7th of May. I think booking for the conference has just gone live on our website or on the Central Christians in Science Eventbrite page as well. So on to tonight. I keep saying good evening and tonight, but for our guest this month, it's definitely not evening, and perhaps only just past his lunchtime. We are being joined across the Atlantic by Joshua Smith, who is a pastor based over in Mississippi in the US. Although I think it's fair to say we've missed meeting in person over the last couple of years, one of the things that the last 2 years has done is get us more involved in technologies, and that's opened up a whole kind of new way of speaking to people and hearing from wider voices than we would have before. It's certainly an advantage that technology gives us, and perhaps that's a theme that we'll discuss a bit as the evening goes on. But tonight we'll be hearing from Joshua on the themes of his hot off the press book, Robot Theology, Old Questions Through New Media. So just before I hand over to him, just to give you a bit of background, I first came across Joshua on social media while writing a short article for Science and Christian Belief Journal, in which I was frustrated that Christians, by comparison to society in general, were not really engaging with the whole kind of field of AI and robotics and big data. But of course, sure enough, as soon as I had written the article and it went off to the printers, there was a glut of new books and writers in the area just as it was published. Many of them, however, took perhaps what I would say is a slightly cautious approach to the field. Robots and aliens were being seen as competitors to humans, not just in day-to-day life, but also for the love of God and for the position of humanity in creation. Offering a distinctly Christian perspective as well seemed to amount to little more than rejecting other viewpoints without an effort to engage with them or look for the collective and shared good in them. However, now enter Joshua. He not only wrote about the area carefully and positively, but always seemed to be on the lookout for opportunities to talk with people in the field from as many different perspectives as possible. He built up and sought the good wherever he found it, which I think is a really great witness to the contribution Christians can make in general without even getting into specifics. That's not to say he is just a yes man, though, agreeing with everyone, but he was also able, I think, and got a better audience for his own ideas because he demonstrated a willingness to listen and learn. So we'll hear about some of his ideas shortly. And his approach seemed to be a witness to the sometimes scorned, a good witness to the sometimes scorned idea that Christian thought can't have something interesting to say to contemporary issues outside of the church itself. And his approach has caused people to sit up and take notice. And he now regularly engages with leading experts and researchers in the field of AI through podcasts, interviews, social media, and his growing portfolio of books. His voice, I think, is very much a welcome one that I am very pleased to have with us tonight. So the format for tonight will be a short presentation by Joshua, and then we'll move into a time of questions and discussions. Please enter your questions as they occur to you in the chat windows, either in YouTube or on Facebook, and we'll do our best to put as many of them to Joshua as possible. We are aiming to wrap up around 8:30 UK time, so that is in just under an hour's time. So for now, I will just hand over to you, Joshua.
Thanks so much, Gavin. And I already see several friends joining us tonight. So some of you are familiar with them, or some of you are not familiar. But like Gavin said, I'm a pastor, so I approach these topics through that lens, and primarily as a theologian from a particular confession. I'm Baptist, and so I kind of read things through that lens. But let me just give you kind of a quick shotgun approach into my work here and what robot theology is about. So, all right. So this is the book, and this is what I mean by robot theology. Basically, what I wanted to do was look at robots, look at AI-driven robots, and from multiple different perspectives of what they are, and social robots and non-social robots. So things like Siri, things like humanoid AI robots, and then ones that are just kind of in between, where they're animal or therapy robots. And so I wanted to look at those objects and technologies, but also kind of unpack some of the metaphysical assumptions built into them and give a theological conclusion. So that's what I mean when I say robot theology. It's not like some people think, where I'm trying to advocate for robot priest, or that I think that I'm some kind of robot priest or anything like that. But it's a simple way to say, I'm trying to do theology by looking at robots and other AIs. And the reason why I wanted to do that is to build a bridge between robot ethics and Christian ethics. And like Gavin was saying, when I was kind of getting into this field several years ago, it was very frustrating because there are all these issues of privacy and warfare, sexuality, different many issues that are very important to Christian ethics and theological anthropology. There weren't a lot of voices pushing into it or analyzing it, other than we just reject it flat out. And so I wanted to give some nuance and approach to it that could serve the local church, because there's a lot of concern and fear, and there wasn't a lot of resources out there. So this is an overview of the book. If you haven't picked it up yet, or if you're interested, just kind of give you the contents. And this is what I'm going to do for the rest of the time quickly. It's just kind of go through chapter by chapter and tell you what are the major conclusions and outcomes that I was trying to go for in the book. Okay. So chapter 1 is really just a quick introduction to how, when I started writing it, it changed a little bit because COVID happened, and COVID kind of pushed forward my initial thesis, which was that we would use these implements as not substitutionary, but supplementary, and that there would be these points in history where we would need to use them. And COVID kind of proved my point in that. And so I had to rewrite chapter 1. But basically we're trying to, since the beginning of time, kind of work around our limitations and our finiteness. And that's just something we do as humans. And you take Adam and Eve as historical figures, or however you want to read that narrative. But in many ways, it's like that is a very human response to the garden, right? It's like a prison to them. They want to get out. They want to know more. They are concerned about things that they don't know. And so that's just kind of embedded in ancient literature, this desire to know more. And that's kind of what chapter 1 introduces the reader to. But also, how do we assess some of this technology? Okay, so the Bible, a lot of people don't see it this way, but the printed Bible is a piece of technology. And we, in many Christian circles, will bemoan one version of the Bible. So we have the digital Bible, YouVersion Bible app, and then you have the printed Bible. Okay, well, neither one of those are original manuscripts or original apparatuses that we had or that were written, right? We don't have any of that stuff. But why is one valued more than the other? And if I look at the Bible on my phone, why is that different than reading it in a book? So how do we make that assessment? And a lot of the Christian frameworks that I looked at don't really give anything for that. So in chapter 2, that's really what I wanted to do, is start to lay down some frameworks, some foundations for can we encode morals into robots? Can we think about them morally? Is it even possible? And yes, I do believe it's possible. And I think that kind of goes back to my initial frustration, is that you see all these ethical assumptions built into all kinds of things in technology and medical ethics, and even in stuff like automated vehicles, or autonomous vehicles. There's certain assumptions built into them, and so why can't we build in certain assumptions about human nature and about human value um, into it purposefully? And I think we can. So chapter 3 gets into the idea of personhood and patiency. You hear a lot about in robot ethics the idea of moral agency, and a lot of times what we want to do is think about the mind and whether or not it's conscious, and so I don't really push into that a lot, because I don't think it's the most important thing. It's not the most important question for me, at least, that we need to be asking. It's whether or not it's perceived as a moral agent. It's whether or not, for example, will we have a problem if there was a humanoid robot working in our office space, and then one of the coworkers just decides to abuse it? And I think most of us would have a problem with that, because one, it's destruction of property, and that's not how we want to act. But also, there's some philosophical undertones to that as well, right? We a couple weeks ago, I was giving a lecture, and I was talking about the AI replica chatbot and the story that came out about men abusing it, and everybody says that's wrong. We shouldn't do that, because that might lead into how we treat um, females, or how we might treat our spouse or whatever. And I said, well, what about Siri? Do you ever abuse Siri? And everybody's like, yeah, well, it's not the same thing. But why is it not the same? So one of the reasons why I think we make that distinction is how we view persons, and how we view what's who's important, who's not, and who qualifies as a person. And so really trying to unpack some of this language, all the assumptions that's built into that one word, person, and then personhood. And it's a big conversation. And I have like 18 to 20 pages to kind of unpack that, but it's really important. And you see a lot of assumptions that are built into how we think about life and about ethics, about legal rights, which is the topic of the next chapter. But this is the custodian of value theory, is what I see a lot in Christian circles. And then I don't lay this out strictly in the book like this, but this is kind of the summation of what I'm getting at. We tend to think either it's all in the mind, or it's strictly in how we make judgments about our actions. And so that's between Kant and Aristotle there, or it's just because God made us distinct and unique as the apex of creation. And so those are all kind of arguments that float around Christian circles. And I kind of take a little bit different approach to it. Instead of custodian of value, I see persons as a character of value. So the Bible talks very widely about personhood and persons. It doesn't give like a strict, even with the Imago Dei, right? That it's a lot of people kind of go back to that. It's never like a strict, definitive, this is what the image of God is, other than Jesus is the image of God, right? It doesn't give us anything other than that. We don't know what Jesus looks like. We don't know what God looks like. We don't know his physical attributes, all those types of things. So those must not be the most important things about him. And so what do we know? We know that, God values justice, mercy. He values a relationship with us. He values how we treat other people. He values the contemplation of our mind, certainly, the worship of our heart, all those things. And so I began to notice, as I studied humanness and personhood, that we need to make a distinction between, human is not the only person, right? And that's pretty widely known in animal ethics and environmental ethics, and even in legal theory. But a lot of Christian readers and lay people don't really understand the nuance there, and will just use human and person synonymously. And that can kind of get us into trouble when we get into the weeds of ethics and moral theory. And even as we talk about like legal rights and stuff, you see a lot of this circular reasoning kind of built into, well, we're made in the image of God, and this is more important because we're humans, and the environment is less important, and so on. But so this is just kind of a rough theory that I've been working on to kind of change that perspective. And so why do I think robots, AIs can be persons? Just because I think they can be characters, and this is a very prominent view in Eastern cultures, especially in Japan, where when an entity comes into a household, it's no longer an object but a person. It is now working in that theater, so to speak. Like it's a part of our family, and just like our animals and stuff, it's no longer just an animal. Like we're not going to go slaughter Fido and eat him for Thanksgiving, right? We're gonna he has a very distinct and unique place in our family. And I've had people ask me to pray for their dog, or like the sadness of when someone loses a pet versus like when a toaster breaks. It's not the same. And I think, and my theory is that once AI gets to a certain part and integration into our life, and even the embodiment with robots, I think it'll be similar to our relationship with animals. And so that's why I try to broaden the moral circle there with personhood. And I know there'll be more questions about that later. And so these are all legal persons. A child. It could be animals. Starship down there, it has legal rights in certain states. In Pennsylvania, for example, it was given pedestrian rights so that the robot could actually make deliveries. Rivers are granted certain rights for protections. Corporations, obviously, are legal persons. And why is this so important? Well, I think it's the most practical way that we can protect entities, objects, people, things that need to be protected. And so, I value life. I value human life. I value animal life. I value the environment because it sustains our life, right? We're the only animal that cannot sustain life without um, the environment, right? We need it. We thrive on it, and when our planet is destroyed, then we can't survive. So there needs to be this holistic approach to how we treat the environment, how we treat animals, and even as we integrate more technology into our life, how we treat it and how we use it and how we shape it, because it's also unilaterally shaping us as well. And I think that's part of McLuhan's theory about the extension of man and understanding media, is that you never just set something in place and it just kind of goes. It's like it's going both ways. It's impacting us, it's shaping us, and many times we're passive to it. So, legal personhood, granting legal rights to certain entities, qualified entities, there has to be practical reasons to do that, right? It's not all rights for all robots everywhere, and that's kind of the point of chapter 4, is that there are these practical applications for granting certain robots rights. And people think, well, that's just crazy. Well, I think about this in times like COVID, and I'm sure there will be more places that we could think about. But when people were autoimmune compromised, who are autoimmune compromised, who couldn't get out to the grocery stores, or they have a handicap, or whatever it is, or they're just scared and trying, or maybe they had a newborn at home, whatever it was, granting Starship the right to use the sidewalk is a very practical thing. And I think that's how we need to think about robot rights. Is not like it deserves rights because of it looks like a human or because it acts like a human, although there's a case to be made for that. Um, but that it's a way to make room in our innovation, that we're not stunting ourselves from something that might actually be a very ethical creation. It's a way to protect engineers. It's a way to protect companies. It's a way to protect citizens, either from a corporation or vice versa. And so these are the very practical components to. It's very boring in reality. Like robot rights sounds like robot revolution, but that's not actually what it is. It's just kind of going through and how does this work with our city's bylaws? How does what's the difference between a starship and a scooter or a stroller. Like this, it's very boring in reality, but it's something that we have to think through as we um, write different pieces of legislation and as we and vote on these things. Like, do we want this to be, do we want 1,000 starships running down the sidewalk, or what about rural places? Do we need a starship there, and where there are no sidewalks, like where I live, like it's just going to get run over if it goes on the street, or some redneck's just going to take it off the side of the road. So we have to think about those things each individually in particular context, and so where you are may be totally different, right? So chapter 5 is about robotic friendship, and yeah, I mean, can robots be our friends? Right? That sounds crazy, but it's really not. And I think again, COVID kind of opened up a lot more people to this idea. And there's just a couple here. The dolphin's not a robot, by the way, but the reason why I put that up there is that Kate Darling wrote a book last year that came out last year called The New Breed, and it's about how really we should view our relationship to robots the same way that we view our relationships to certain animals. And we've used animals in the past to do certain things. Dolphin, assisting the Navy there and different things. And um, there's all kind of applications. I'm not advocating for that. That's not what I'm saying. But that we should see them just like we see our animal companions. Like they have a very real impact on us. And I think likewise with AI and in other applications, they have a real impact, and it can be a real virtuous friendship, and it could also be um, a detrimental relationship. It could be if it becomes substitutionary for human to human interaction. Absolutely, it could become a problem, and so we have to think about this. I think in some ways how we think about how we enjoy science fiction and fantasy and the cultivation of that, and even in young children, right? We don't reprimand kids for having an imaginary friend, or we don't, like our brains can handle the nuance there. And as much as we like to say that social media is, overwhelmingly negative, it's really, the research says something different, that our mind can handle it, even though a lot of interactions that we see on social media may be negative. And I think likewise with robots and AI, it'll be similar. There'll be some very bad cases, as like I mentioned earlier with the AI replica chatbot, but there'll also be very positive cases, as with like Pero down there, the seal-like robot, where it's proven that this robot interaction with it's not. Nobody thinks that it's a real seal. Nobody thinks that it's a real animal, but it has a real impact on patients with dementia. This has positive impacts with kids who struggle with, or those who are on the autism spectrum. And so there are real medical reasons to incorporate these robots into friendship um, relationships with humans, and to integrate them into our lives, and to make them. And those are the type of robots that I'm excited about making, and helping, and innovating, and not, I think a lot of times what people have in their mind is this vision of Skynet and other things, but um, in reality, that's not what we're trying to make. And I don't think any company is setting out to make Skynet so much. I mean, they are making stuff for the military. Don't get me wrong, and a lot of that is driven by that complex here. But um, the public can shape this a lot more than we realize, and so that's a lot to do with chapter 5. The next slide, I'm going to talk about something very disturbing. So, if racism and race science is something that you're very sensitive to, I just want to mention this quickly as we move into it, because this is probably one of the more disturbing chapters for people. So, robots and racism. If we just go back to kind of the Czech foundation of this word, robota, it means forced labor. It means slave. And there have been several people who've talked about this, especially from a distinctly Black perspective, that so many times in science fiction in literature, the black body is seen as a robot, as a type of machine, and even there's this fear of black people because they are seen as machines, and you see that in chattel slavery, without a doubt. But also, this is interesting to me because there's this fundamental misunderstanding about what race is, um, and even in race science that I see today, and you know, like what is the essential component of race? Is it a bloodline? Is it a phenotype? And some of this science is based on extremely racist theories, and it's just ironic to me. So I've used this chapter to kind of push back against some of these theories, and also try not to mitigate or marginalize culture, and I think that's what people are getting at, more so when they talk about blackness or whiteness, is that it is a distinct culture, and I absolutely agree with that. That's a very positive thing, and that's something that we can build into AI systems. And there's a researcher, Philip Butler, who's working on that, a distinctly black AI chatbot. So instead of trying to homogenize all AI and robots and saying we need to just kind of whitewash everything, so to speak, we can, you know, make systems, programs, algorithms, whatever it is, to reflect a diverse model because that's what life is, right? We're not, doesn't matter what your phenotype is. We're not all white Southerners, right? And we're not all the same just because our pigmentation is the same. And so we need to celebrate that. That's a beautiful thing. I think that's a God-given thing. It's not a curse or anything like that. So I try to unpack that in this chapter. And then chapter 7, the last chapter, I try to think about positive applications for AI and robots in pastoral ministry specifically. And so just as a distinction or clarification, I'm not saying that I ever want to substitute human pastors for robot pastors or anything like that. But I think there's some valid reasons to incorporate some of this tech into our church life. How far do we want to go with it? Do we want to use facial recognition software to track attendance? Do we want, like, how far do we go with privacy issues? In my denomination, there's a big issue with child abuse and other people taking advantage of children. Like, where are the lines with that? Do we want to use it in that regard to weed out predators, to find patterns in that sense? Do we want to use it to prevent financial scams? Like, these are all things that companies do. So why doesn't the local church invest in some type of subset of these systems that will benefit the church in a positive way? Systems that will um, impact or help those who are marginalized, those who can't be embodied in worship, those who are disabled, those who have ailments, whatever, who can't be physically present, and not to push them down and make them less than, but say, how can we give them the fullest experience of worship, just as if they were sitting next to us where they desire to be, and really try to rethink about our ecclesiology in that way. And I just see this overwhelming negative response to these systems because we have this ingrained thought that they're going to replace us, or they're going to make us less than, and I don't think it has to be that way at all. I think it can in many ways make it more, and or make our worship deeper if we use it in the right way, if we are proactive in how we respond to it, if we craft it in a way that is God honoring, and that is clear, distinct. We're encoding our morals at the beginning, right, and saying this is the rubric in which we want to utilize this technology, and these are the things that we don't want to do, and etc. And try to be a part of innovation, and work with coders, engineers, robotics companies, and say, these are systems that we could use, and these are systems that you could make millions off of. I mean, theoretically, right? I mean, there's not many AI chatbots out there for distinctly Christian conversation, or whatever we want to use it for, right? And so I think the possibilities are they're there, and we just have to have some nuance and a few key voices that are interested to explore these topics with other scholars who are in the field. And so some other books that are related to my book that I found really helpful. I just want to share these. Um, really, really helpful books. Some of these are free, some of these are not, but they're there if you're interested. And just really greatly benefited from all these scholars, talking to them, learning from them, and just want to say thanks, CIS, for inviting me, and for Gavin for being a supporter of my work. And I look forward to dialoguing with you guys very soon.
Thank you very much, Joshua. That was absolutely fascinating stuff. As people are preparing their questions, you've had one or two come in already. Can I just ask you what drew you into this field in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of been interested in robots, so to speak. I've programmed a little bit in high school, working with industrial robots. I've built things. I've got an engineer's heart, I think, in a lot of ways. I've always taken things apart and not always put them back together properly, but that's just kind of how I'm wired. And then I worked with these systems, some systems, AI systems in the military. So I have some hands-on experience with some of them. And then my philosophical research began when I was doing my PhD, and I think around 2017, 2018, I started formally researching it. So it's related to philosophy of mind and shows like Humans, which was a Channel 4 show, and Westworld, which was a HBO show. That it was very similar in some of the topics, but those were kind of launching pieces for me. And then in 2019, the ERLC out of Nashville, the Ethics Religious Liberty Commission, which is a Southern Baptist branch, they released a statement of principles on AI, and that was really so it's all revolving around all those things happening that I wanted to write more about this.
Yeah, things like Humans and Westworld very much in the popular culture.
Yeah,
and very good programs as well.
oh yeah.
Very interesting, very important questions. So one question we've had is about robots at prayer. Is it ontologically possible for robots to pray for us? And if so, who are they praying? To who are they praying to, and or what? Whom or what are they praying to?
Yeah. So when you say praying for us, like, do you mean praying with us? Do you mean um like interceding for us? I guess is that
I think so. Yes, I think that's where
yeah.
the question is coming from.
Yeah, so I mean, my view of God and God's sovereignty is that, I mean, I think it's possible, right? And so I even think it's possible, like if a robot asks me about Jesus and, wants to make confessions about that, and theological confessions. I mean, I think that could be God honoring. Obviously, God knows all things and he hears all things. So even the animals and creation worship him, it says in the book. And so absolutely, I think even the things that we create either bring glory to God, or they are deforming of the image in a way. And so I think, yeah, I think it's possible. I don't know what that would look like in actuality, but I think it's definitely a possible thing for us to see happen.
Relates to another question about robots worshipping with us. Would that be possible, or would they have their own form of worship that we couldn't interact with or be part of?
Yeah, I think so. I know that it's a hard thing for people to kind of wrap their head around, but I think it's a very probable scenario that we'll have some form of entity joining our churches in the future. I know that sounds crazy, but I do think it's possible, and it's very probable. I think we'll see them in our churches in the next 20, 30 years in some form or capacity. So I think we'll just kind of follow the culture to where it goes and where it's, integrated. It's usually what happens. And so, yeah, I don't know.
Wait and see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I had a comment about the relationship between children and cuddly toys. So I see this every day with my daughter, and they seem to accept kind of these creatures, as it were, on an entirely similar level. Is there something we can learn from interactions of how children specifically interact with the world?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of data behind, if you're interested in like medical treatment for like, there's the huggable robot that was made to treat kids with autism spectrum disorder, and just very, very positive research about how if you put this cuddly bear in front of a child that has difficulty communicating, which a lot of kids do, it's more open, and we have better interactions with it. So I think even just in general, though, not even with ASD, but kids naturally attach to them. And I mean, we have robots at our house, and it's not like the kids think that it's real like a human, but that it's maybe because their imagination is bigger,
Hmm.
and because they're not so they haven't set up so many hard binaries yet,
Yeah.
but they have more positive interactions. I think even more joy with those interactions. I think it's the same question about why do adults go to Disney World? Why would you do that? The trees are plastic, the birds sounds are fake, like, but it's supposedly the happiest place on earth. I don't believe that, but like, why do we do that? Why do we watch science
Yeah.
fiction? Why do we watch Netflix or whatever? Like, why do we do that? And so I think we have certain deception that we're okay with, and this is something I talk about in the book. So it's this banal deception, right? You don't think that when you're watching a television series that it's actually happening, or that it's so and so really jumped his car over this valley or whatever. Like, we don't really believe that happened, but that doesn't mean that it's a worthless piece of media, right? And reading in books and stuff, like, just because it's fantasy doesn't make it worthless. And so just because the robot is not a real human doesn't make it any less
Hmm.
worthy of interaction. And so, yeah, I think we just kind of have these assumptions about them hard baked into our interaction because of science fiction, and we have a hard time getting past that because so and so said it's not real, so it's not real. And I even think we see that with virtual reality right now, is that there's a real debate about whether or not you know these interactions matter. And but I guarantee you they do. Like, harm over digital media is, assault and those things. It's the same thing. um but it is distinct in some ways as well. So that's a good question to think about, and I think we probably need to be more like children, um especially as it relates to faith. And so, if you want to make that case, I mean, Jesus said, you know, hey, look at these children, look how they interact with me and society. It's very different, right? So, we have
Yeah.
a lot to learn.
Okay, what's a kind of practical question concerning algorithms in churches? Given that there are problems with algorithms and biases,
Mhm.
and say in the example we're given here, like someone has been screened for being an offender to work at that church, should we be avoiding those algorithms because of those potential biases?
Yeah, I don't think we need to avoid them. I think we need to give more data for the modeling. So I think we would need to have some conversations with whoever's writing it, and coders, engineers, whatever. I think those are real questions that we need to have as the local church, as different denominations, confessions, to say, how far do we want to go with this? Because I think it's a privacy issue too, right? Like, um, but I think when we're dealing with children, it's a different set of criteria, right? I want to value the protection of the child more than I value the protection of the, you know, perpetrator or pedophile or pedophile, whatever you want to say. And so for me, that's a personal conviction that I want to protect the child over the cost of the privacy of the person applying to. And I think that's something that we give in a concession to say that I want to work with children. I think that should be a given that we default to the protection of the child. But also, like we need to protect children too, and how we share images and what's being recorded, and because, like you say, there's real harm in an algorithm that is used in the wrong way, and there's
Yeah.
real harm in data collection that is not protected and is it can be used for all kinds of numbers are very dangerous, and we need to make sure that we have a theological voice in that arena.
So, how would you suggest, as you were saying in your presentation about there's a lot of good that could come from the church using a lot of these systems, that businesses, schools, government use them a lot and get a lot of benefit from them. How do we encourage churches towards using them, but also taking into account the precautions, as you were just saying?
Yeah. Well, I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm still trying to figure out the practical applications of some of this. I think one of the things that I really wanted to see are some things that I'm working on now. How can I use this to deepen my connection to my widows who are not tech savvy, who don't have smartphones, who don't have those type of things, and to give them some tactile something like just a basic system that I could communicate with them. So natural language processing stuff that we could use to give them some type of companion in their loneliness, and not to substitute pastoral care, but to supplement it. And I think that's kind of my ethos with all of this stuff in church work is what are the systems that we need to supplement the ministry that we're doing. And we're seeing at a high rate pastors are leaving the ministry. There's no one to replace the pastors that we already have. There's burnout, there's moral failure. And so I think, why aren't we using this for, why aren't we building distinct AI chatbots or therapy bots for pastors who can't afford to pay $140 a session for therapy, or that could help them, that could treat them? Why aren't we investing in those types of systems? And I think it's just non-existent what's happening, at least here. Like outside of, there's a lot of stuff in like missionary work that I could see and a lot of applications, but I think it's harder when we get into outside of like data analytics, which I think will be where it's probably picked up first, unfortunately, as far as like tracking numbers and the financial stuff. And there's just a lot of practical things that we use it for too. Like most of the churches here, there's one pastor. There's between 10 to 70 church members, and one pastor. He might be doing all the financial stuff. That could be kind of delegated to software or to an AI to help him. But that also entails that pastor, who may not be tech savvy either, understands what he's working with. And so I think just to start, we just need a lot of education about these systems, what they are, what they're not, and the differences, and then kind of help local churches. Like, how far do you want to integrate this into your church life, and how much data is just kind of open? Like, it'd be extremely easy to hack any local church around here. Extremely easy to penetrate from the front door to their network systems. And I may or may not do that from time to time, but it's extremely easy to steal all their data, and they just have no clue about why that's important, or But anyway, so I think just education firstly, and then we can get into some practical stuff. I think later, but yeah, it's good. Those are good questions.
So we've got a question: what is the ontological difference, if any, between a smartphone and a robot? This is maybe a question about AI's versus robotics, I think.
Well, I mean, robot could be a lot of different things. So, I mean, I guess specifically you'd have to like, what do you mean? Like an embodied robot? Do you mean social robot? I don't. I mean, there's a big difference. Like, it's to me, a robot is the ones that I'm talking about are AI-driven robots that are embodied to interact with us, or social robots, or even just non-social robots like Siri and stuff like that. So there's some overlaps there. So if we're talking about Siri and your smartphone, like, you know, she's kind of more akin to an algorithm or a data set than anything else, and your smartphone is, you know, a smartphone. So I mean, it's it is a computer, but I mean, like, we're also, so this question is interesting, because we want to kind of, we want to boil everything down to its bare essential parts. Like, what if we did that with a human? Like, what's the difference between a human and a machine? Well, one's a natural um, object, right? And one's an artificial one, right? But at the same time, if we boil it down, okay, well, a human's just a bunch of different collections of cells. Okay, well, that's not how we think about humans, but that's how we think about machines. And so you kind of, you want somebody to say, well, a robot is just actuators, sensors, and, you know, software. But at the same time, it's much more than that, because it's also embodying a worldview that the creator made to. So, like, a robot that's made for adult services is very different than a robot that is made for warfare. Like, they're built distinctly, and somebody made that, and somebody worked for a certain company made those things. You know, and smartphones are similar. They're made to do a certain thing. But if you have an iPhone, right, it's, you probably mostly have that iPhone because, not because of its phone features, because it's a terrible phone, but, you know, you use it as a camera, or, you know, you have an $800 portable camera. You could go buy a DSLR for cheaper than that, but that's why you have it. And so ontologically, yeah, there are differences for sure. If we're breaking everything down to its components and its parts, but I would argue that that's probably not the best way to think about this tech and even technology in general, because we're thinking about ideologies that go behind them, and build them into kind of their ends, and how we use them to manipulate them. So yeah, and that's a hard question to answer, but I don't know if that helped answer the question or not.
I've got two questions lined up for you for short, kind of like 3 or 4 sentence answers, but each of them will probably need a separate talk in themselves. So as a challenge for you. Do Christians have a right to opt out of AI and tech?
Yeah, so I think this question is, there's a guy who, you know, this digital minimalist perspective. I think absolutely you have the right to opt out of things, and there may even be an argument to be had, like, I don't think that all robots should be created. I don't think that all AI systems should be created. And I think, in fact, some of them should be banned from creation, and some of them should be outright, uh, like, pushed away, and we shouldn't make them at all. And so I think absolutely we have a right to. And I would also ask, what do you mean by right? Um, you know, we have a right to not participate. Absolutely. And I think a lot of churches will utilize that. And there's stuff like Analog Church and other places. But to me, it's kind of ironic, if not hypocritical, to take that position, because if you're going to go there, like, why not go further and say, I'm just going to go live off the grid? And which I think there's some actual argumentation for. Absolutely. So that would be like another talk that we could follow up with. Like, you know, how far do we want to revolt from these systems, and how far should we integrate them into our life? That's a great question.
So this is another great question. Can you foresee conflict between the rights of humans and robots? And if so, how can humans be protected?
That is a very loaded question that I can't get to. Chapter 4 of my book kind of addresses some of that. Not to like, cheap shot to the book, but because rights talk is so loaded, it's so hard to kind of even unpack that in a minute. But yes, you will be protected, and human rights and robot rights will not be isomorphic. And I think even now, like the assumption is that the law will protect the human entity, but there it's much more complicated than that because we could be protecting the wrong human. Okay, so if the corporation, um, a lot of times it's the ones with the money that are protected. So it's those humans who are protected, but not the ones who are hurt by the entity. And there's all kind of cases you could look at the Volkswagen factory, I believe, wherever in Germany that people have been killed by robots, and just look at the litigation that they have to go through to get compensation. It's protecting humans, but not all humans, and they're not all equal, even though constitutions may say that they are. The reality is that's not how the law works. It's whoever has the most money to fight usually has the most protection. So it's a very, very loaded subject, and it's a great topic.
Yeah, you're right at the end.
Yeah.
I'll just squeeze in one more question before my own final two questions. Just come on, it's an interesting one. Do you see any benefits to members who can't attend church in person having a telepresence via an embodied robot versus watching a live stream?
Yeah. So I think this kind of all goes back to design. Like, there's a lot of terribly designed robots out there that, are like, here, grandma, here's your robot, like that sounds like a trash can, right? Like, no, not that at all. But yes, if we think very carefully about the design and how it utilizes the space of that person and how it respects their space, dignity, um, and on physical presence, like absolutely, I think that is beneficial, and I think will give some meaning, um, maybe some closure, maybe um, some deeper engagement with the content that they wouldn't have otherwise. And I think that's why people have companion pets, right? It's not a full on substitution, but it has some benefits to it if the design is right. And so I want to make that absolutely clear. Like we can do this in a way where it dehumanizes the human person, and that's not what we want. But if we really, and I think this is where we would need like those people to speak into. That's what I think about scholars like Nancy Iceland and others who worked from that framework, who were disabled, and you know say we need those people to help us in that design process to say, hey, this is what we would need. This is what we don't want. This is what it needs to look like, and and these are the limitations it needs to have for me to have a fully positive interaction with it. But yeah, I think it could be a positive one.
So just to finish with two questions from myself. How do we avoid pessimism in this field? You are clearly very hopeful, and other people are less hopeful. So how do we maybe swing things over to the more kind of
Hmm.
encouraging side of things?
Yeah, well, I just look at the person of Jesus. Like it doesn't make sense to me to be pessimistic about anything, even though that's how I might feel. I tend to be a very pessimistic person. And so, I mean, like naturally, that's where I go. But in my theology, I'm pressed a different way. And so, when I think about technology and when I think about robots and AI, I know that it begins with this process and cycle begins with my own heart and my own mind. And so I need to create and orient myself to a positive, hopeful, eschatological orientation. So if I'm in that space when I create and build and make, then I think I'll be hopeful as I try to integrate this technology. But if I'm in a place of fear, which I think a lot of Christians are when they approach this topic, then yeah, that's going to bleed out into it. And I just think there's things that we certainly need to be watchful for. Things that we like. I'm not optimistic about like drone warfare or anything like that. It's a totally different perspective. Okay, so but the robots that I'm talking about in the book and addressing with like pastoral work and stuff like that, I'm very hopeful about those, but not about certain ones. So I think it just depends on what we're talking about and also what our orientation is and why we're doing it and we're trying to reflect hope into the world. So it doesn't make sense to be pessimistic about all these things if that's what we're trying to promote and project hope.
Yeah. So my final question, you might have partly already answered with that, which was how has your work in this area impacted your own personal faith?
Yeah, it's definitely challenged me a lot in my own views of robotics and AI, but it's also broadened my appreciation for interdisciplinary dialogue and collaboration um, to work with other fields and to try and build communities of dialogue where, quite frankly, the doors have been just kind of slammed shut. And so it's given me a lot of hope in that regard, and it's made me more intentional about the tech that I use. My concern for privacy for my children and how I'm teaching them and our congregation about the integration of tech into our life and what are the boundaries for it and how we let it shape us in different ways. And so yeah, I mean it's affecting me all the time and still shaping me as I try to broaden my appreciation for God's creation, but also my role as a creator in this relationship and to worship him with every facet of my mind and in my creations.
Brilliant. That was a wonderful moment to end on, I think. So thank you to everyone for all of your questions this evening as well. We've run slightly over time, but that's okay. Great questions and great to have the chance to put them to Joshua as well. So thank you very much to Joshua as well for making the time to do his presentation with us and to take our questions. Remember that our next event, as it were, will be that spring conference at the beginning of May. Again, recommend it to you. It's a great bunch of organizations who are going to be coming, and there's a bit of momentum coming out of the pandemic, as it were, amongst these organizations. We're just trying to kind of like carry that forward, and it would be great for you to come and hear more about what they've got to say and more about their plans for the future as well and how we all might work together going forwards. So until then, take care and keep safe, and happy Easter for a couple of weeks' time as well. Good night.